morning, everyone. It's quite challenging speaking after somebody like Gila Beripe. And personally, I find that in science, we often need to face challenges. So I'll give it my best shot this case as well. And so I'd like to start with asking ourselves a question about knowing the world we live in. So geologists have this thing about holding every couple of millions of years, giving a name to a geological period. And I want us to reflect for a second on what geological period we live in currently. And so as it turns out, in recent years, scientists around the world understood that it is time to change the name for the geological period we live in. Up till very recently, it was called the Holocene. But then, knowing and seeing the effects on what happens throughout Earth, a new name was given to the geological period. And now it's called the Anthropocene, coming from anthropo, person. And this comes from the fact that in looking and measuring things around the world, just like you see here in one of the most famous graphs in science, in this case it's called the Killing curve, looking as a function of the year, what is the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So Killing decided to start to measure it in the geophysical year, which happens every several decades. And from that year onward, he started to see a clear rise in the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This is the result of our activities on Earth. And so as you can see here, there's this significant increase which really affects how our atmosphere looks like. This is one reason to think that we live in a new geological period, because such a change has not happened for millions and millions of years. And where does that come from? So I want to try, in the spirit of this session and the gathering that we have here, to try and challenge us with some questions. So I'm not the only one being challenged this morning. And so let's ask the following question. What is the greatest emission of greenhouse gases that I experienced this year? Is it because of my commute to work? So I work at the Weizmann Institute. I live in a small city just outside of Tel Aviv, and I take the train every day. So if we calculate the effect that results from me commuting in that way to work, is it because of my appetite for meat? So we just recently had Independence Day in Israel, and as you might know or not, barbecuing chicken is a very common activity. Is it the result of my usage together with my wife and 2 daughters of electricity at home? Or is it my flight to Montreal? So I think you're supposed to get some time and use the touchpads that you might have mastered yesterday. They should be under your chairs if you look for a minute. And I think that they'll start the countdown just now. So time to reflect, but not a lot of time to reflect.
Wow.
Okay, so I see there's several perspectives on that. So as it turns out, we're doing such calculations in my lab. We try to develop new methodologies in order to convey information on such impacts that we have on our planet, in order to understand what are the main issues at play. And I have to tell you that the answer is and actually I have to tell you, it wouldn't have been much better if I was driving here. It's not that there's something significantly bad in airplanes. It's just that if you calculate the impact of traveling this large distance from my hometown to here, that's actually larger than all the other options. And so I want to see not only our effect on this, we could also look at the effect that we have. I think we could move to the next slide. Here is the fact that I think is very much related to what we heard this morning. What you see here is a picture taken by a satellite that measures gravity around the world. Now we would imagine that would be a quite boring task because the gravity is supposed to be all the same. But as it turns out, NASA scientists found that already by circulating in space, satellites could measure the changes in the gravity of the Earth that result from our usage of groundwater. What you see here are the measurements of gravity when measured from satellites above the northern parts of India, where there are intensive agricultural fields that go into the aquifer and every year make the table of water of the aquifer go down and down, depleting the precious natural resource of groundwater in order to ensure that there is enough productivity in the fields. And this causes a very major problem because every year you have to dig deeper and deeper. Not only do you see it as a result of looking at the gravity, you definitely see it on the land surface itself when the farmers find it harder and harder every year to reach the water that they require. So I was quite staggered to see that this is something that you can, from space, see that in Punjab and other places, you already see this. And one is led to consider, why is it that so much water is being required? So in order to feed the planets that we afterwards consume for our food, it's interesting to know that you require, for example, for wheat, about 1,000 liters or 1,000 kilograms per 1 kilogram of output of grains that you would get afterwards. So there's a ratio of 1 to 1,000 here. Not only that, for other things, it could actually require even more. And you ask yourself, what is the underlying reason? Well, how come you need so much water? And so that leads us to the next challenge. What is the reason, or the main reason, why plants require so much water? Why do you have this ratio of 1 in 1,000 for wheat? Is it because they need to cool in the sun? Is it because they use it in photosynthesis to build their bodies? Is it because they lose water when they're trying to catch carbon from the air? Or is it in order to keep their internal pressure so that they could keep their shape? 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the air. Plants have to find a way to take that carbon from the air. The way they do it is they're doing a process known as carbon fixation. They open these small holes, gateways, in every leaf. They're called stomata. You can see them here. There's many of them. You can have between 10 and 1,000 on every square millimeter. They open these in order to capture the carbon dioxide from the air, but then they lose water that flows out from the plant into the air. And in each such case, for every carbon atom that gets in, about 1,000 water atoms, molecules, are getting emitted. And this is the main reason why humanity requires so much water. That's the reason why there's a need for everything that you heard in the first presentation. Because this is the major, more than 70% of the fresh water being used by humanity is used for that cause. Not to take away from the need to find clean, fresh water for people to drink, but this is definitely what's the reason underlying the requirement, for example, to dig so much water from the aquifer in places like I've shown it in the satellite image before. And so what are plants actually doing here? So you know, when we're trying to store energy, we're doing it with batteries, right? For batteries, you need to go and dig in all sorts of places to get these rare earth metals in order to do that. Plants were much smarter. Through evolution, they found an abundant source that enables them to store energy. Their invention of the battery was sugar. They're taking the carbon dioxide and they're transforming it with the energy coming from the sun into sugar. And that's really the basis for everything that we see afterwards in the biosphere, of both supplying our food, all the beautiful things that we see outside, and also the fuel that we're using later on downstream in our cars, in our power plants. And so in my lab, we're trying to learn lessons from nature about how to run this process as efficiently as possible. And so now we're ready for the last question. this is a very common thing you could ask. What is the most abundant protein on Earth? So now you can engage your family, sitting in dinner on Friday night or Saturday night, and now you can engage them in some questions like this. Is it because the most abundant protein on Earth breaks sugar? Is it because it fixes carbon? Is it because it builds tree trunks? Or is it in order to make skeletons? And I will start a countdown. Yes, and the answer is, so let's see the correct answer. And so what happens is, in these small openings, those stomata that I mentioned of plants, this small process of taking the carbon dioxide is really the gateway between the inanimate, inorganic world into all of the biosphere and everything that we see on it. It's all happening through this one key enzyme. It's called Rubisco, by the way, that is the most abundant protein on Earth and runs this process of taking carbon dioxide, moving us from the inorganic into the living world. Yeah. And so here is a sketch of what happens here. We're starting from energy coming from the sun. And then it's interesting to note that even though we're very limited in energy often, every day and every hour of the day, the amount of energy coming from the sun to planet Earth, if we were able to utilize all of it, 100% of it, in every hour there's enough energy for all of humanity's requirements for a whole year. So it's quite interesting to know that in 1 hour there could be enough for a whole year, whereas in the way we're running things today in terms of using fossil fuels that accumulated for a very long time, every year we're utilizing fossil fuels that accumulated over about 1 million years over the planet. So it seems like there could be some solutions to that, but we have to be very smart in how to utilize that. The experts in trying to utilize that energy are plants, and therefore we try to learn from them. What they do is they take the energy that comes from the sun, and they're using something called light reactions that are able to take that light and store it in some energy currency called ATP. And that energy currency could not be used for very long. They have to find a way in order to store it for long periods of time. And that's where they come up with a solution of finding a battery. And do a set of reactions that take carbon dioxide from the air. The first step here is that Rubisco that I mentioned before, the most abundant protein on Earth. And they give us as a result the sugars, which could then feed through the highway of metabolism in every cell of our body, as well as in plants, build all of the other requirements. And so this is really the main interaction or main interface between humanity and planet Earth, because this is what we're using our land resources, the biggest fraction of it. That's what we're using, about 70% of the water resources, freshwater resources. And that's this place where we're affecting the content of our atmosphere very, very strongly. And so we're trying, there's a group of about 15 researchers in my lab at the Weizmann Institute, coming from very diverse backgrounds. Some of them are physicists, some of them are computer scientists, some of them are engineers, biologists, chemists, biochemists. There's a zoologist. We're all trying to look at this question from different perspectives. And we're trying to learn from plants and bacteria what could be the best ways of achieving that process. So for example, you can see here how we can consider, what you see here are basically ways in order to present the stages happening in biochemistry. Every circle that you see here is actually a carbon atom. And we're giving it different colors depending on what type of chemistry is happening there. They're called functional groups. And then you can find that in every organism we could find some specific enzyme. An enzyme is something that could take one material, do the trick of turning it into a different material. And so in this circus that happens in plants, these things are being transformed from one compound to a different. you're starting from taking, so this circle is a carbon dioxide that gets incorporated, and by connecting things that could happen, for example, in yeast, the same thing that is the same organism that gives us the beer that we enjoy and wine, or something that comes from an organism such as E. coli, that's a bacteria that lives in our gut. We could try and think how it could be good lessons of taking lessons from nature on how to run this process. And so, two brilliant students in my lab have been asking the following question. What would be the best way to try and connect these different components that scientists have been studying for many, many years in order to find the best way to achieve this process of carbon fixation? So the two students are Aaron Bar, oops, sorry for that. The two students are Aaron Bar-Even and Elad Nur. Aaron Bar-Even was studying in the Technion, and he was the most insightful biochemist in his class. I remember when I met his former teacher, she's now a professor at Harvard, and I was telling her that he's now part of my team. She would tell me, I'm still remembering my worries about him coming to ask me questions during class. And that was more than 10 years afterwards. Elad Nur was the best computer science student at the Hebrew University where I was teaching, and also the guru of the intelligence corps in the IDF. I knew him from there, and therefore, when I started the lab, I was really fortunate that he joined it as well. And so these two guys were actually running a contest. They were trying to find how to get the best way of achieving this process of taking carbon from the air and giving you something that could feed as sugar. But then they were trying two different approaches. Aaron was using his knowledge of biochemistry, trying to think about all the different possibilities of doing that. Elad Nur was trying to teach the computer on how to do biochemistry. This was a long process. Every time Elad would come up with the best solution that the computer could come up with, Aaron would look at it and just laugh. He would say, yeah, I thought about this more than half a year ago. It's not so good, it wouldn't work because of this, because of that. But in every such case, it was a new iteration, and we had new rules that we could teach the computer in order to think better of how do you do biochemistry, and how do you get some insights into that. And in this process, we got to an ability now to find and recreate the solutions found out by nature, as well as explore new possibilities of doing that. And so let me show you the most promising pathway that we found, way to take the carbon dioxide from the air. And this is what you see here. I won't go through all the steps if you don't mind this time, but anyone interested, we've been spending quite a lot of time on that. What you have here is carbon coming in what is the best enzyme being able to take carbon from the air, and with a set of reactions, each one coming from a different organism, each one well characterized by scientists for a long time, but as far as we know, that does not exist in nature currently, a way to achieve in the end a sugar that is several times faster and therefore more efficient in terms of the biomass than anything we currently know or employ. We are very interested in that, as well as many other people around the world in trying to implement such things. In order to do that, you have to learn how to go and build such things within bacteria, within living cells. And so for that, you need special kind of people. And here are the people doing that in my lab. These are the people who are experts in trying to build such things within a living cell, within a bacteria. These are Niv Antonovsky, Shira Amram, and Lior. And they're really learning how to take these things and put them together and measure how they work together. And so, to pick the big picture, we're trying to do that now in this, in a bacteria, which is sort of like the, if you like, the pet of molecular biologists. It's called E. coli. It usually lives in our gut, but for a very long time, we've been learning how to try and play around with it inside the lab. And we're trying to implement such things inside of it. To wrap up, I'd like to show how these things connect together. So at Weizmann, we're trying to develop new approaches in order to try and think and build ways in order to try and help us with the challenge of how to store energy and how to give us sugars that could then be used for other things. It's a global effort because, as in science, we're trying to take the first steps in trying to do that, but it would require many, many other people to collaborate in that, in trying to achieve both a way to store renewable energy for an extended period of time, as well as increase the yields in agriculture. So I'd like to end up with some of the other groups in the lab. So as you can see, what we're actually doing here is trying to live off of air, just like in Yiddish they say Luftgeschäft. So we try to do Luftgeschäft 2.0, trying to live off of air. And we're having a lot of fun. If you're anywhere next to Weizmann next time, you're welcome to come and join and meet some other students. Thank you very much.
Time for perhaps one question. I see one very eager question over there. Yes, please.
One of the things about water and plants is, of course, through spray generally, and an awful lot of the water seems to me is wasted on the ground rather than getting on the plant. There's a system when you're spray painting that you can sometimes magnetize the object you want to paint, and the spray just goes right onto that rather than being wasted. Is there any way that can be envisaged to make better use of the water when it's being applied to plants?
So the question is, if I understood correctly, is about better ways in order to enable plants to utilize the water. For example, that instead of us watering them and just being lost maybe by evaporation, by going into the ground, by using more sophisticated methods to give the water directly so the plants utilize it in the most effective way. So that's definitely a direction that's very promising in increasing the efficiency in which we use our water resources, let's say in the conventional way. I would say that's definitely one way to go, and there are actually other branches of trying to approach that. What we're trying to do at the Weizmann Institute, in my group, is try to think, after we try and implement, and people try to develop and implement approaches such as this, such as many other ones which are interesting, such as just the way of using irrigation that were developed in Israel, which are way more efficient in terms of the water use efficiency than the normal way of just watering. What would be the next step of moving forward, of trying to think how to even further increase the usage of both water and carbon and the energy coming from the sun? We're trying to see how from the same parcel of land, with a given amount of energy coming from the sun, we could achieve more with less resources. So I would say it's a complementary step to the thing that you were mentioning. Okay, so by way, I'd like to connect to the next talk that you're going to hear today. And so I'd like to ask you to invite you to join me in seeing the result of the thoughts and imagination of the Canadian filmmaker, James Cameron, when he was also very interested in trying to imagine how plant life on other planets could look like and how we could rethink them. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pandora.
So, how will they know we're here?
I'm sure they're watching us right now.
Keep moving on.
Keep up, guys. And here I go.
Scanning. It's that fast?
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, that is signal transduction from this root to the root of the tree next to it. So, we should take a sample.
Okay. Sample. it's probably electrical based on the speed of the reaction.
Nor you've contaminated the sample with your saliva.